My name is Taryn. I'm 33 years old, and 8 years ago, my older sister looked at my 9-year-old son, who was sitting quietly in the corner of her kitchen organizing the silverware drawer by length, and told me he was ruining the family. She said it kindly. That's the part I've never been able to forget. She poured herself more coffee, and she said it like she was sharing something obvious that I'd been too close to see. He makes everyone uncomfortable, Taryn. Every gathering, every holiday. You can't keep pretending this is fine. What she wanted was simple, she said. She wanted me to find him a therapeutic boarding program. Something structured, something that could reach him in ways a regular school couldn't. She had a list of places already printed out. She pulled it from a kitchen drawer like she'd been preparing for this conversation for months. Because she had been. My son, Kale, is 17 now. 8 months ago, the video game he spent 3 years building alone in his bedroom was acquired by a major studio for $2.1 million. 3 weeks after the deal went public, my sister appeared with a family law attorney and a theory about why a teenager with processing differences couldn't be trusted to manage a significant financial estate. I told my attorney 2 words, let them come. And then I told KL. He looked up from his sketchbook, the same beat-up, spiral-bound thing he'd carried since he was 8, and he said, I've been waiting for this. I want to start at the beginning, because the beginning is the part that explains everything that came after it. Kale was 4 when a developmental pediatrician first said the words dyspraxia and auditory processing disorder in the same sentence. The doctor was methodical about it. She walked me through what it meant. His brain received sound differently, filtered it differently, which made following verbal instructions feel like translating a second language in real time. His coordination was affected. Writing by hand was exhausting and slow. Reading aloud was nearly impossible. None of that meant he was less. The doctor said that clearly. She said some kids with his profile were exceptional at spatial reasoning, at pattern recognition, at holding entire systems in their heads. She said to watch for what he gravitated toward. He gravitated toward maps. He was 5 when I found the first one. A hand-drawn layout of our apartment. Every piece of furniture placed exactly right, the closets labeled, the distances marked with dots he'd counted in steps. He handed it to me like it was nothing, like he'd just been recording something that already existed and needed to be written down. I kept it. By the time he was 7, he was drawing maps of places that didn't exist. Whole territories with topographies and borders and something he called the rules, which were the laws that governed how each zone worked. He couldn't explain them in words. Talking was always harder than drawing. But he could show you on the page, and it always made a complete kind of sense. His father left when Kale was 4. I've given that fact exactly as much space as it deserves, which is this: he left, and we figured it out without him. What I couldn't figure out was my sister. For a while, I told myself she just needed time. She had 2 kids of her own, older, quieter, kids who did well in school and played organized sports and sat through holiday dinners without incident. She wasn't a cruel person, I thought. She just hadn't learned how to make room for someone who moved through the world differently. Then came the kitchen conversation. We were at her house for Thanksgiving. Kale was 9. He'd been in the corner most of the evening, which was fine. Crowded rooms with overlapping voices were hard for him, and he'd found the silverware drawer and was sorting it methodically, which was how he settled himself. He wasn't hurting anyone. He was quiet. He was coping. My sister waited until he'd gone to the bathroom. She set her coffee cup down and said, I need to talk to you about what we're going to do. The list she pulled out had 4 programs on it. 2 were in other states. 1 was residential, year-round. She had already called one of them, she said. just to ask questions, just to understand what the options were. "He needs more than you can give him," she said. "That's not a criticism. It's just the reality." My brother-in-law said nothing. He leaned against the counter with his arms crossed and looked at the floor, which I would spend years learning was its own kind of answer. I told her I wasn't sending my son anywhere. She set the list on the counter between us like it would keep. "Then I need you to understand," she said, "that I can't keep having him here. My husband's family is coming for Christmas and I can't." I picked up my coat. I got Kale from the bathroom. I drove home in the dark with him in the back seat. And I sat in the parking lot of our apartment building for a long time after he'd gone inside, just watching the steering wheel. A week later, she sent a text. It said she loved me, but she needed me to take the situation seriously before it damaged both of our families. I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and didn't pick it up again until the next morning. That was the last real conversation I had with my sister for 8 years. What I didn't know, and wouldn't know for a long time, was what she was saying to everyone else. She was telling our mother that I'd cut her off because I was embarrassed about needing help. She was telling our cousins that she'd offered resources and I'd refused them out of pride. That I was keeping Kale in a bubble. At family gatherings I stopped being invited to. She apparently cried about her nephew. The one I wouldn't let her see. She told a version of the story where she was the one left standing at the door. I found that out later from my cousin, Ixen, my mother's niece, the only one in the family who thought to call me directly instead of forming opinions from one side. She called about 3 months after the game deal went public. What she told me made me sit down on the floor of my kitchen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Those first years were hard in a way that has its own particular weight. I worked medical billing during the day and took online certification courses at night. Because flexibility mattered more than salary when I had a son whose school schedule required me to be reachable. I learned Kale the way you learn a city you weren't born in. By walking it, by getting lost, by figuring out which routes worked and which ones left him stranded. Transition warnings mattered more than almost anything else. 10 minutes, then 5, then 1. Skip them and we'd lose an hour. His processing delay wasn't a slowness, it was a depth. He'd answer a question 40 minutes after I'd asked it. But when the answer came, it was usually the most precise thing anyone had said all day. He understood everything said to him and around him. He just couldn't always respond in the time frame other people expected. When he was quiet, he was working. His teacher at the middle school, a patient, methodical man who ran the resource room, was the first person outside our apartment who saw it clearly. He called me in after a few months and showed me something Kale had built on an old school laptop, a prototype, a small, navigable world. He's been teaching himself game design, he told me. I gave him a library book on it as a joke, and he came back the next week having finished it and built something. He paused. I don't want to overstate it, but you should see what he's doing. I sat in that resource room and navigated through a small, hand-coded map, rough, full of placeholder graphics, but complete, with its own logic, its own rules. I recognized the handwriting of it immediately. It was the same mind that had mapped our apartment at age 5. I drove home shaking in the good way. By the time Kale was 13, the world he was building had a name. Meridian. It had factions and geography and a central conflict that he could diagram for hours, but struggled to explain in words, which meant he built an in-game text system with optional voice narration for players who needed it. He'd designed an accessibility feature into his game because he understood, bone deep, why it mattered. I didn't know then what the game would become. I just knew that when Kale was at his computer, something in him went quiet in the right way. Not the tense quiet of a room that's too loud, The quiet of someone who has finally found the room that fits. He worked on Meridian for 3 years, mostly alone, with library, resources, and free software, and a stubbornness I recognized. It's because I'd gotten it from somewhere, too. I helped with nothing except keeping the Wi-Fi on and the kitchen stocked and staying out of his way when he was in the middle of something. When he was 15, he submitted it to an independent game development showcase. He didn't tell me until after. He won. The article that ran in the gaming press the following year described Meridian as a narrative RPG of unusual emotional intelligence, designed by a self-taught 17-year-old with a voice unlike anything in the current indie landscape. It mentioned his name. It mentioned his age. It did not mention his diagnosis, because we'd agreed from the beginning that his work would speak, and he would keep his private life private. 2 hours from where we lived, in the town I'd stopped thinking about years ago, my sister read that article. I know this because she sent me a text. After 8 years, the first message she sent me was 4 words. "We should catch up." I stared at it for a full minute. Then I took a screenshot and sent it to my attorney, a woman named Cora, who works out of a small firm downtown and has, in my experience, seen everything. Cora called me the next morning. She said to let it sit and watch for what came next. What came next was a letter. The firm's name was on the envelope in the kind of raised, serious typeface you pay extra for. Inside, the language was careful and considerate and very deliberate about what it was actually saying. My sister and her husband were seeking, first, a formal recognition of the ongoing harm caused by my decision to restrict their access to a minor family member. And second, this was the part that made my hands go cold. They were requesting a judicial review of the current financial arrangement for a minor who had recently come into a significant estate. Their argument in plain language: Cale had a diagnosed processing disorder. A substantial amount of money was now connected to his name. Could his mother really be trusted to steward it? On paper, it was dressed up carefully, but I'd learned to read past the dress. They didn't want to help my son. They wanted to establish standing, a foot in the door. And to get through the door, they needed someone to believe. I couldn't be trusted with what was on the other side of it. They had been building that case for 8 years. They had the head start. I brought the letter to Cora, and she read it slowly, the way careful people read things they want to understand completely before they say anything about them. Then she put it down and said, "There are 2 ways to respond to this. One is louder, one is smarter." She said to let them come in and talk, let them put every claim into words, out loud, in front of a witness they trusted. Words on the record are easier to answer than feelings in the air. They've been building their version of this story for 8 years, she said. Let them deliver it, and then let the room see what it's made of. She told me the risk was real but narrow. A petition questioning a custodial parent's fitness rarely succeeds when the parent has a clean record and a child who is clearly thriving. But rarely, she said, is not never. I went home and told Cale. He was at his desk with the sketchbook open. The same one he'd carried since he was 8, now thick and warped with years of use. He listened to everything I said without reacting the way I expected. He didn't look worried. He looked like someone who'd already done the math. "I want to be in the room," he said. He said it the way he says things he's already decided. I didn't argue. In the days before the meeting, I watched him do something I only partially understood at the time. He took the sketchbook down from his shelf and sat with it at the kitchen table for long stretches, turning pages slowly, adding nothing, just reviewing. Like a person going through notes before a test they'd been preparing for without knowing the date. On the last page he reviewed, he wrote something I couldn't read from across the room. Then he folded a clean sheet of paper into thirds, wrote on the outside of it in his careful block letters, and tucked it into the back of the book. I didn't ask what it said. There are things you wait for. My sister and her husband arrived at Cora's office on a Tuesday in October. My sister came in, smiling, which I had expected. She commented on the parking, the weather, the nice light in the conference room. She smiled at Cora. She smiled at the court-appointed advocate who'd come to observe on Cale's behalf. She looked past Cale, like he was a chair that happened to be in the room. In the entire meeting, she did not speak to him directly. Not once. She had come to make decisions about his life, and she could not bring herself to look at his face. My cousin sat at the far end of the table, the same one my sister had personally called and asked to attend as a family witness, certain she'd be an ally. It was, I would come to think later, the single biggest mistake my sister made that morning. Cora opened the meeting by inviting them to state their concerns. I folded my hands in my lap. I let them talk. Their attorney went first, polished, reasonable, careful with his language. His clients had been denied access to a family member for nearly a decade through no fault of their own. They had tried repeatedly to maintain a relationship. They were not seeking the money itself. They were seeking oversight, simply asking whether a minor's significant estate was being managed with appropriate support around her. Then my sister began. She had been waiting for this room, I think, for a long time. She talked about how hard she had tried to stay connected, how I'd cut her off without explanation, how she'd reached out over the years and been ignored, how she'd had to watch, from a distance, as her nephew, a boy with real and documented challenges, grew up without the family support he deserved. Her voice broke in the right places. She'd practiced this. At the end of the table, my cousin nodded, slowly, the way she'd been nodding for 8 years. The attorney wrapped it up with a reasonable, considered voice. No one was questioning Cale's talent. They were simply raising a concern about whether a teenager with a diagnosed processing disorder was being adequately protected. He said, "the boy," twice. Both times he gestured in Cale's direction without looking at him, as though Cale were a variable in an equation rather than a person sitting 8 feet away, listening to everything. That was the moment Cale moved. He picked up the sketchbook from his lap and set it on the conference table. The sound it made, soft, deliberate, stopped the room. He opened it to a page near the front, then turned the book so it faced my sister. "I started this when I was 8, he said. His voice was quiet and level. "I want to show you something." On the page was a map, not of a game world, of my sister's house, her kitchen, her living room, the hallway where the bathroom was, done from memory, from when he was 9, and in the corner, in careful block letters, the place where she said I didn't fit. My sister opened her mouth. Cale turned to the next marked page. "I wrote down what you said," he told her, "that same night, because I wanted to remember it exactly." The page was filled with his painstaking block printing, the handwriting of someone for whom every letter costs effort. But it was legible, it was dated, and it was a direct word-for-word record of the conversation he had overheard standing outside the kitchen doorway that Thanksgiving, while my sister told me he made everyone uncomfortable and I needed to send him somewhere else. My sister said, "That wasn't how it happened." Cale said, "I know what I heard." Not angry, he had the tone of someone reading a measurement off a gauge, flat and accurate. Then he opened his laptop. On the screen, Meridian, he navigated to a faction, one of the game's central antagonist groups. A council of elders who ruled a region by deciding, from a distance, which citizens were fit to remain within its borders and which needed to be directed elsewhere. Reviewers had called this faction the most compelling villain in the game, because it felt, in their words, devastatingly real. "I built them," When I was 12, Kale said. You can read the design documents, they're all dated. He looked at my sister directly for the first time all morning. You made them very easy to, he said. You gave me everything I needed. The room was quiet. My cousin reached out and turned the sketchbook toward herself. She read the page he'd shown us. Then she read the map. Then she looked up at my sister in a way I recognized. The way a person looks when they realize they've been wrong about something for a very long time and cannot go back and unknow it. Cora said quietly, I think we have what we need. Their attorney had nothing left to file. You cannot argue against a dated sketchbook page written in a child's own hand. You cannot cross-examine a kid who simply wrote down what he heard on the night it happened. My sister gathered her things without the manner she'd walked in with. My brother-in-law, who had said not a single word the entire meeting, looked at his hands and kept looking at them. My sister did not speak to me on her way out. She did not speak to Kale. She did not look at him once on her way to the door. The withdrawal letter came 8 days later. Short, professional, no explanation given. The petition was never formally filed. Kale's trust remained exactly as it was. A clean account with no withdrawals, with a record sitting next to it that said so plainly. My cousin called me that same week. She sat on the phone with me for over an hour and told me everything. 8 years of family dinners. 8 years of my sister's practiced grief. 8 years of a story my cousin had believed, because she had no reason not to. She'd been handed one side of it, and she'd accepted it, the way most people accept things that sound like heartbreak. She said, I'm so sorry I didn't call sooner. I didn't tell her it was okay. We both knew it wasn't. 8 years isn't a misunderstanding you can sand down in a phone call. But I thanked her for calling now, and I meant it. And that felt like the truest thing I had to offer. The story moved through the family the way my sister's versions had. Living room to living room, one conversation at a time. Except this one had dated pages in a sketchbook. This one had design documents and a game that 500,000 players had already described the villain faction of as feeling uncomfortably, specifically real. Some family members reached out. Some went quiet in a new way, the way people go quiet when they've been caught believing something. Because it was convenient. I didn't chase a single one of them. I'd spent 8 years producing evidence of my own decency for an audience that had already made up its mind. I was finished with that. Kale seemed lighter in the weeks that followed, not triumphant, settled, like a room where something had been slightly off-center for years had finally been adjusted, and everything sat the way it was supposed to. I asked him once on a Thursday evening whether he was angry. He thought about it, the way he thinks about things, fully, without performing the thinking. Not anymore, he said. I used to be, but I put it in the game. He looked at the sketchbook on the table between us. I used to think the council were the bad guys, he said, but in the third act, the protagonist realizes the council only had as much power as the people who kept believing them. He tapped the cover of the book. Once enough people stopped, the council just became what they always were. People who were afraid of someone they didn't understand. I looked at him for a moment. When did you figure that out? I asked. He thought about it. Probably when I was 12, he said. But I didn't know how to say it until I built Meridian. There's one last thing. I've been working up to it, the way you work up to the last page of something you've been reading, slowly on purpose. After the meeting, when everyone had gone, and it was just the two of us, and Cora packing up her files, Kale reached into the back of the sketchbook and took out the folded paper he'd tucked in before the meeting. He held it for a moment. Then he handed it to me, not across a conference table, not for anyone else, just directly to me, with both hands. On the front, in his block letters, for Mom, whenever you need it. Inside was a letter he'd written when he was 12, before the game had a name, before any of this. It was short. He'd always been economical with words, because words cost him more than they cost most people. But it was complete. It said, "I know you gave up things I can't count. I know because I counted what we have instead. I want you to know I see it, every part of it. This is me writing it down so I don't forget to say it." He'd folded it into the back of that sketchbook and carried it for 5 years, waiting, without ever telling me, for the right day to hand it over. Not the day the game sold, not the day the letter came from the attorneys. The day after the room went quiet and the record was corrected and we could finally, both of us, just rest. The sketchbook still sits on his desk. He's started a new one for the sequel. Same spiral-bound style, already thickening with maps of somewhere that doesn't exist yet. My sister sent one message the following week. I recognized the weight of it before I opened it, so I didn't open it. I put the phone face down and left it there, and eventually I put the message in a folder I don't look at, because that felt like the right place for things that were never going to change anything. I don't need her to admit what she did. I stopped waiting to be believed the day my son handed me proof that he'd been believing in me the whole time, quietly, in a sketchbook no one else ever thought to read. If any part of this reached you, if you've ever been the person who stayed while someone else rewrote the story to say you'd left, tell me about it in the comments. I read everyone. Subscribe if you'd like to be here for the next one, and thank you for being here with me today. The people who called you a burden are still out there waiting for a version of you that never needed anything. Let them wait. The ones who actually showed up already know exactly who you are.